In our last flight, we flew from Sarasota to Plant City in 2D. Now it's time to fly back to Sarasota. I'll bet that if we do it in virtual reality, it'll be a whole different experience. What do you think? Let's hop into the pilot seat and get started. Alright guys, I recorded this video and the audio track for it the day before my discovery flight. If you have not seen the video for my discovery flight, check it out. I'll put the link here above so you can hear all about my amazing experience flying a real Cessna Skyhawk. In preparation for my discovery flight, I was a bit nervous about trying to use rudder pedals because I normally use a twist axis on my joystick. So for this flight, I broke out my rudder pedals for flight simming and tried to use them for taxiing and flying the airplane. And I will tell you, it's much easier to use the flight sim rudder pedals than the rudder pedals on a real airplane, but you can see how that goes here. With that said, we'll cut back to the original audio for this flight, and I'll finish the startup and pilot's brief. That looks good. We'll lean the mixture a bit. Check the oil pressure, oil temp, check the ammeter. That all looks good. Now we'll head up here and get the transponder to standby. We're going to start out squawking VFR 1200, get our nav lights on and our pitot heat, and we are ready for the pilot's brief. Alright, we've got ForeFlight Web loaded up here. So we are departing from Plant City and flying to Sarasota. We're flying in a straight line. So nice and straightforward. We're going to fly underneath the 3,000 foot shelf of the Tampa Bravo. And to stay in that shelf, we're going to use Sarasota's VOR and fly the 220 radial to it. We're going to overfly TV towers here at 2,500 feet. We've got some nice visual landmarks like the Bill Young Reservoir, which will be off to our left here. Nice body of water that's easy to spot. As we continue flying south over Sun City, we'll get another reservoir, which is Medard Park, which has a plant attached to it with some stacks. Then we'll overfly the Manatee River. At that point, we are inside of the Charlie airspace of Sarasota. And as we follow the VOR, that's going to take us directly to the end of the runway. Now, Sarasota Tower will give us a pattern entry, depending on what runway is in use. Now you can see that it says contact Tampa approach within 20 nautical miles. So Tampa approach is actually managing Sarasota approach, the outer ring. If we grab ForeFlight Web here and move that, go into flight plan mode, you could see that that distance, and that was a pretty good guess, is 20 miles. So it's pretty far out. So we're going to need to contact approach when we are there to request our landing and permission to enter the Class C. So we'll dial in our COM1 frequencies. We'll get CTAF here for Plant City, and then we'll get Tampa approach on standby. We'll go over to our nav one and we'll dial in the VOR frequency for Sarasota. We won't be able to pick it up here yet, but once we pick it up in the air, we'll verify it by listening to its Morse code. Then we'll head down, we'll head over here to the course deviation indicator and dial in our desired radial. So we're going to fly the 220 radial to Sarasota. So we'll need to intercept that radial upon departure. Now we're flying VFR, but we're going to use VOR navigation to help us manage the airspaces, right? Because we don't have a GPS, so we've got to keep ourselves inside of that 3,000 or underneath that 3,000 foot shelf. And finally, we'll go down to COM2 and dial 121.5, which is the guard frequency that we'll monitor. Plant City traffic, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, taxi runway 28, Plant City. So for your amusement today, as an added bonus, I've hooked up my rudder pedals. I almost never use them. I use the twist axis of my joystick. However, with my upcoming discovery flight, it occurred to me I should probably start practicing using rudder pedals. So here goes. Get ready for some really bad taxiing, some even worse rollout during my takeoff, and probably a catastrophic landing. Now that I've set the bar, let's see how I do. Alright, we are clear except for the tugger driver that we can't get away from, so we're just going to drive forward and hope he ducks as the wing smacks him in the back of the head. Okay, so far a little wild, but not too bad using the rudder pedals. I think I have more trouble with the brakes, the toe brakes, than the pedals themselves. So as long as I'm going at a reasonably slow speed here, it's not too bad. If I were using the twist axis on the joystick, I'd be right on the yellow taxi line. But not bad. Okay, we're coming up to the hold short line. Whoa! And I can never quite step on the toe brakes equally. I always kind of am heavier on my right foot than my left and end up swerving back and forth. I hope I don't do that in the real airplane. So we'll get our transponder to standby. I'm sorry, we'll get our transponder to mode C. I'm all frazzled today. And we'll do a run up. So we'll get our RPMs up to 1700, and then we'll do our mag check. Down over here. And gotta look back and forth. So do mag left, mag right. Looking for a 50 RPM drop. With each one, max 150. I think I'm going off of memory. I should really be using the checklist. I was telling you in the last video how I finally got the complete checklist for the C152. And here I am, just winging it. Plant City traffic, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, departing runway 28, straight out departure, climbing 2,500, Plant City. Okay, we'll get our feet off the brakes here. And the really interesting thing about rudder pedals with toe brakes is you have differential braking. So if you tap the right brake here, it'll really swing you around much more quickly than using the rudder pedals to steer by themselves. It also slows you down. Alright, let's see if I can get myself back on center line using my pedals. So drifting back and forth a bit, picking up some speed. So far, that actually went really well. Okay, we're in the sky now, so we're doing much better. The sky being 20 feet above the runway. Alright, I was expecting a little bit of Mario Kart action with my Cessna using the rudder pedals, but I think the relatively short takeoff and low speed helped it. I have to say, taxiing with rudder pedals is actually kind of fun. You know, you've got, like I said, additional capabilities like differential braking, and I don't know, it's like Norditrack for your feet. You know, the way they work is you're sort of skating on them. I think we'll find out, since I've never been in a real Cessna, but I think real rudder pedals, you're more pushing and stepping on as opposed to sliding up and down like a Nordic track. We'll see. Alright, we're going to hold this heading until we get to 500 feet above traffic pattern altitude, and that looks amazing. This is a photogrammetry area here in Florida, and having flown around Pennsylvania recently in photogrammetry areas, it's cool just to see a different part of the country. You know, it looks different. Everything's very flat here in Florida, so you really see the landscape for quite a while in all directions. It looks great. So we have just picked up Sarasota VOR. You can see CDI-1 now has the nav light illuminated, and the indicator is sprung to life. That's off to the left side there. So we'll go up here and we'll turn on the speaker for nav radio 1. Listen for the Morse code. Take take a look at the Morse code next to SRQ. And now we verified it, so we are sure that we are actually following the right nav signal. Turn that back off. It still looks amazing. I'll talk a little bit about VR. I've also been flying in VR and X-Plane a little bit lately, so I'll tell you some of the differences. So we're going to turn. Our goal is to intercept the 220 radial from Sarasota and then fly that heading of 220. So right now I'm flying pretty close to due south. So I want to intersect the radial, and then I'll turn back right to heading 220 when I do. Now we're coming up on 2,000 feet. We're going to pay attention to our altitude, and as we approach 2,500, we'll level off. If you remember my last flight, I flew at 3,500. That's because we were flying a heading between 0 and 180. Now we're flying a heading between 180 and 0, so a even altitude plus 500 is appropriate for that when flying VFR, starting at 2,500. So we picked 2,500 since that's underneath the 3,000 shelf of the Tampa Bravo. Okay, we're coming up on our cruise altitude. Once we level out, then I'm going to trim the pitch so that it flies nice and level, and so that I could almost take my hands off the controls. It's definitely really fiddly in the C152 and Microsoft Flight Simulator to trim the pitch. So flying in VR. I mentioned in my last video that I wasn't going to do many virtual reality videos because people weren't really watching them. And then my very next video, I'm making a virtual reality video. I think that, when I look at the analytics for my YouTube channel, most people like 6-minute videos on my channel, and I think that people tune out after that, so a 45-minute VR flight is maybe a little bit much for what people are looking for. Won't stop me from doing it though, so here we are. Now the reason I'm doing it is because VR is just amazing in Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's really cool in X-Plane too, it's just different. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, this looks real. I mean, the photogrammetry area that I'm flying over looks real. I mean, it's nuts. And that's why I like doing these VR flights. I just did this flight in 2D in my previous video, and now all I'm doing is I'm flying back to the airport I came from, and it's like an entirely different flight when you do it in virtual reality. Now, in X-Plane, you don't have the realism of the landscape. And X-Plane people, before you flame me in the comments, calm down. I've played X-Plane for years. It's what I started on. I still love X-Plane. I love flying VFR. So off to our left here we have Medard Park. That's one of our visual waypoints I pointed out on the flight brief. And if you look at our course deviation indicator, we've almost intercepted the 220 radial. So I'm going to get ready to turn and fly heading 220 so we can fly right along that radial and maintain it. But back to starting a war between the X-Plane fans and the Microsoft Flight Simulator plans. They're just two different flavors. So when I fly X-Plane in VR, for one thing, the FPS is much, much, much higher. I mean, it's the maximum FPS that my VR headset will allow, so I can run a higher FPS than the refresh rate on my headset. And when you max out the FPS in your VR headset and there's zero lag and zero stuttering, it does something to your brain. So I mean, you are just like in the plane, and I forgot what that was like after flying in Microsoft Flight Simulator for a while, which has much lower FPS because I have a medium tier system. But flying in X-Plane, even though the graphics aren't as realistic for the landscape, the sensation of being in an airplane was more realistic, just because of the high frame rates that you get while you're in VR. And the way the airplane moves, you know, in X-plane is very realistic. Like, the airplanes have weight and mass to them that the airplanes, I would say, are floatier here. Going back to the flight, you'll notice I just toggled over to Saratoga approach, which is really Tampa approach, anticipating that we're going to have to call them shortly to get our squawk code and announce our request for landing at Saratoga. The other really cool thing about VR and X-plane is you've got things like the Reality Expansion Pack for the default Cessna, or the new Airfoil Labs Cessna NG, which, you know, lets you take fuel samples from the wing, do the complete pre-flight inspection, you know, walk around the entire aircraft, carry the checklist with you in virtual reality. So I would love to see something like that for Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I think both programs have their strengths, and you can switch between them based on the type of flying you want to do. You know, if I want to do a very realistic startup and have an aircraft that maybe handles a little bit more like the real thing, you know, I want to fly an X-plane. And if I want to fly like a true VFR pilot, flying purely visual and looking for visual waypoints and markers, I mean, look at this out my wing here. Like, you cannot beat Microsoft Flight Simulator, and this is the default scenery. So for those who play X-plane, and myself included, think of how many hundreds, thousands of hours you've spent downloading ortho photos and trying to make the landscape look as good as it can. So it's great to get into Microsoft Flight Simulator and say, I want to go to Florida, without having to spend the entire afternoon downloading ortho photos. Alright, let's contact approach. Sarasota approach, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, 18 miles northeast at 2,400, landing with India. Squawk 2313, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie. Alright, we'll dial that into our transponder here. We are not yet in their airspace, but we are all set up. Alright, we're going to hold this heading and keep on following the Sarasota radio until we get Sarasota in sight. Okay, we're thinking ahead here, so once we get into the approaches ring, they're going to eventually hand us off to Sarasota Tower, so we'll get Sarasota Tower's frequency dialed in on standby here for Con 1. Off to our left here, we have a big visual waypoint, which is Lake Parrish. It's a big body of water, and it also has some stacks with smoke coming out of them. Those are actually called out on the VFR sectional. So when we planned this route, we measured the distance from Lake Parrish to the outer ring and recorded it as 8 nautical miles. So now, even though we don't have DME, we know that we are 8 nautical miles from Sarasota's approach ring. Okay, straight ahead we have the Manatee River. That's another visual waypoint for us. So we recall that this was to the north of Sarasota. It's also in the outer ring of Sarasota's approach airspace for the Class Charlie airspace. So at this point, ATC is probably going to give us some sort of instructions for vectoring to get us sequenced in for our approach to the airport. So it might be to fly to a specific visual waypoint, or they might just give us a heading to fly. I've mentioned this before, but I was on Pilot Edge for quite a while. I'm not currently a member, but I'll probably rejoin. And it really taught me a lot. That's where I learned my radio calls, and it's definitely intimidating the first time you key the mic and get on air, especially when you're talking to ATC, and you know you're going to mess up the first couple times you do it, and they're probably going to correct you, but you'll learn from it, and after a while you'll just get into the rhythm of it. You'll know what to expect and what they're going to say. Alright, we are just crossing over the Braden River here underneath us. That means we're approaching the tower ring of the Class Charlie airspace for Sarasota. So at this point, approach would hand us off to tower. So they'd tell us to change frequency, we wouldn't do it on our own, and then we would change over to towers. I've already got them on standby. So I'd say Sarasota Tower, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, 1,400, landing with Kilo. Tower would respond back, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, enter left downwind, runway 32, report midfield. So I don't have a landing clearance yet. They've given me an instruction, and most likely when I enter the left downwind and report midfield, then they'll give me a clear to land. One of the downsides to virtual reality is that the detail really falls off at any distance past about 2 miles around your aircraft, and it kind of turns into a bit of a mush. So it's I'd say it's worse on flat landscape like Florida. When it comes to spotting the field and spotting runways, it's very hard when everything is flat in VR. Alright, just underneath our nose on the left, we're crossing a big road, and that is Route 301. We saw that in the pre-flight planning, so we are almost right on top of the field. Nope, we still can't see the field. I suspect it's kind of that brownish patch at the 11 o'clock to my nose, but it would be nice if I could see the runway from here. And the good news is I can see some traffic coming in, so runway 33 is in use. It's landing on 33, so cool. We've confirmed the field is straight ahead even though it's hard to see in VR. So I'm going to turn here and enter the left downwind. Actually, the traffic is really helping me tell exactly where the runway is. Alright, it's busy here today. We've got more traffic on final. So let's give Tower a call. We're midfield. Sarasota Tower, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, midfield. Tower would say, Cessna 9 Golf Charlie, extend your downwind, traffic on final, I'll call your base, report traffic in sight. And I would respond, we have the traffic, Cessna 9 Golf Charlie. Alright, so the tower would call us back up and say, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, turn base now, cleared to land, runway 33. I'd respond, turning base, cleared to land, runway 33, Cessna 9 Golf Charlie. Now on liveatc.net, you'll hear a lot of pilots just use the last 3 letters of their call sign, so they'll say 9 Golf Charlie for brevity. I think it's good practice, though, to either say Cessna 9 Golf Charlie, Cessna 359 Golf Charlie, or November 359 Golf Charlie. Once again, as a high photogrammetry area, this just looks fantastic. It's a little hard for me to tell at this angle which one is the runway and which is the taxiway, but I'm going to assume the taxiway is to the left, close to the airport. That would make sense. So we're going to aim for the middle slab here, and now I can see that's the runway. We've got a displaced threshold. We can't land on that. We've got some PAPI lights. That's always welcome help. Too red, too wide on the PAPI lights. Nice stabilized approach. It's looking good. It just feels really slow. I think the bigger the airport, the slower my airplane feels. Alright, we went to 3 red, so I'm going to add a little bit of power back in to bring this up. There we go. We're back to 2 red, 2 white for the PAPI lights. Got the runway made. Passing over the numbers now. And I would like to land on these white blocks that I'm just passing over, but that's not going to happen. Even though I felt like I was coming in nice and slow, it's still pretty floaty. And we're just about to set down. And we're down. That was a lot of floating, but we stayed fairly consistently on centerline, and here are my rudder pedals. Remember? I'm using the rudder pedals. Whew. Okay, toe brakes. Let's just slow down. Whoa, these are crazy. Alright, I'm just going to mash the toe brakes a little bit here and get myself stopped. And now I'm stopped on the runway, which is not a good place to be. Bring power back in and get ourselves off the runway. Okay, well, could have been worse. Now the fun part. I think taxiing with rudder pedals is a lot of fun. I just find it very hard to land with rudder pedals. I'm sure I'll get used to it. Now this is VerticalSim's Sarasota, and it is amazing. I love it. Teterboro and Van Nuys are two of my favorite general aviation airports because they're just packed with places to park for light GA aircraft. And Sarasota actually has some really nice light GA aircraft sections, especially Dolphin Aviation, which is where we are pulling up to. And right over here, this guy looks pretty good. We'll park next to him and check out the guy sitting under the wing. And if you look really closely, he's animated. So he's looking around, just chilling out, catching some shade underneath the wing of his aircraft. That's awesome. So it's touches like that elevate VerticalSim's airports to just another level. Alright, we'll get everything shut down here. Now we just taxied directly off the runway here. We would have actually taxied off the runway, and once we were cleared, we would have stopped. And then Tower would have probably told us to go over to ground, and then ground would ask where we wanted to park, and they'd tell us how to get there. We just self-parked, which you can't do with an airport that has a ground controller. Alright, we made it. Alright guys, that was a lot of fun. I know it's a longer flight and not everybody likes those, but some people do, and I thought it was really cool, so I shared it for the some people that might want to see it. I talked a little bit about VR too in this one, X-Plane versus Microsoft Flight Simulator, and once again I was wowed. You know, I just did this flight in 2D going to Plant City, so coming back from Plant City in VR, like I said, it was a whole different flight. It totally changes the experience. So give it a try if you have a rig that can support VR. So if you enjoy content like this, be sure to click that like button, leave me a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks, as always, for flying along with me, and stay tuned for further flight adventures.